Welcome to Backpacker Radio, presented by The Trek, brought to you by backcountry.com. I am your co-host, Zach Badger Davis, and sitting to the top corner of my screen is...
Hi, I'm Juliana Chauncey, aka Chaunce.
Love this question, Elise. Question of the day. What's your biggest LNT non-compliant pet peeve? LNT, as you'll learn many times throughout the show, is short for leave no trace. Chaunce, I'll let you start.
I think the one that has bothered me the most, well, the one that I've experienced the most frequently to the point that it has bothered me the most, I would say, would be the Bluetooth speakers. There was a time in I think it was the 100-mile wilderness, where I was hiking just far enough behind a girl where like she was always occasionally in view and our paces were exactly the same, and she had this speaker on like top volume and I could hear her music through my music in my own headphones, and like I was ready to scream at a certain point. I was so frustrated. So that's the one that stands out the most to me. That one drove me nuts.
Yeah, that definitely ranks very highly on my list as well. Not necessarily like the most, probably not the biggest issue from like a sustainability standpoint. I'm sure there are
No.
other things, but like just in terms of things that just like make my skin boil on trail, that definitely ranks very highly. I'm actually going to reiterate what Elise has in our notes here, but people that put trash in fire pits thinking that will just magically get rid of it. Like if you've ever been to any fire pit at any AT shelter, you see like so many cans and mountain house bags and just so many things that are obviously not going to cook off in a fire. So yeah, that one, people thinking that they can just get rid of their trash in a fire is certainly very annoying for me.
Yes, that one definitely.
Okay, let's not beat around the bush. Let's get right to today's interview. PSA before we start here, if you backpack, are thinking of backpacking, or spend any time out on the trail whatsoever, please listen attentively to this interview. The principles of Leave No Trace are nothing shy of essential to ensuring the sustainability of our beloved outdoors. And even if you think you've got LNT down pat, we could all use a refresher and a reminder for why Leave No Trace is so important. So with that said, I'm happy to introduce our interviewee, Ben Lawhon. Did I say that correctly? Of Leave No Trace.
Close enough.
Close. Please correct me. It's a tradition for me to butcher people's names.
Lawhon.
Lawhon. Okay. Noted.
You got it. You got it.
Ben, thank you so much for your time here. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of Leave No Trace, I'd like to start off by learning a little bit more about your background. Can you tell us a bit about how you got into conservation?
Yeah, so growing up, I was very fortunate to have parents that were into the outdoors. We had the pop-up camper and the Chevrolet station wagon, and I grew up in Tennessee, and my parents drug us all over the state with the aluminum Grumman canoe on top, and was very fortunate to be exposed to the outdoors as a kid. I was also in Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout, so I picked up a pretty solid outdoor skill set, which led me on a path to, really getting into the conservation world. Went to undergrad at the University of Tennessee and studied natural resource management. And through that, I was really introduced to, in much more depth, backpacking, whitewater kayaking, all these great things we can do in the outdoors, and got introduced to some books that were written by a couple, Guy and Laura Waterman. One's called Backcountry Ethics and one's called Wilderness Ethics. And it really laid a foundation for me in terms of the role that I could play in protecting our shared public lands. And it just became a real passion of mine. When I finished undergrad, I actually ended up working for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy after a 800-mile summer section hike on the AT, and really started to dig in and really see my place in the world of conservation, and just had such an affinity for the Appalachian Trail. And I was in the Asheville Regional Field Office. So fortunately, our section was Springer to essentially Mount Rogers, which is just a stunning part of the trail. As part of my work with the ATC, I was sent to a Leave No Trace 5-day master educator course. as part of my job. And it just really lit a fire in me in terms of the ability to teach other people how to enjoy the outdoors responsibly. So after about 5 years with the ATC, the job that I'm in now opened in Boulder with the Leave No Trace Center, and I moved to Colorado in 2001 and have been at Leave No Trace. It'll be 20 years in May, and have since gone back to grad school at Colorado State and studied human dimensions of natural resources. And so I've got this sort of skill set that meshes, a focus on managing natural resources in terms of the biophysical impacts, but also understanding and getting into people's heads and their beliefs and their perceptions and their attitudes. And the intersection of those things is how we really can make a difference in terms of influencing the decisions that people make in the outdoors, because we're all sharing a finite resource. We're always making more people, but we're not making more land. And so it's incumbent upon us to do what we can to minimize our own individual but cumulative impacts.
When you were at that 5-day class, what was it? What were some examples of things that you were learning that were sparking that fire? Like, what were some of the takeaways that you still remember?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was an interesting course. It was offered by the National Outdoor Leadership School, Knowles, who's one of our master educator course providers. And the two Knowles instructors that were leading the course had been with Knowles both for a long time and were really instrumental in the early genesis of Leave No Trace. And so it was just a really fascinating group of people. We had the head of the trail system at Grand Canyon National Park, and working for the National Park Service was on the course. We had other folks from the Forest Service. We had individual, just outdoor, sort of enthusiasts on the course. And it was a really unique blend of people. And it made me realize that everybody has the opportunity to learn about and put Leave No Trace into action. And we were in the Cohutta Wilderness in Georgia, and it was just a beautiful spot to spend a week. It was so nice to be a student and be in this outdoor classroom space, learning and honing these skills that I knew. But what was really, I think, the tipping point for me was really the ethical component of the course, right? Because we can teach people skills. And you think of Leave No Trace as head and the heart. The head is the hard skills, right? Where to put your tent and how to build a minimum impact fire and how to properly store your food in bear country. But then there's the heart, which is the ethic. And that is what drives people to put those skills into action. And so having a week set aside to really focus on nothing but the skills and ethics of Leave No Trace, it was a real tipping point for me in terms of my own personal growth, professional growth, but also this idea that I'm equipped now to go teach people about this in a meaningful way. And there's just something really inspiring about that.
Is there a trick to instilling the ethic in people? And these might be two totally different questions, so I apologize if I'm barraging you, but have you noticed any crossover with the ethic for long distance backpackers? Because I know my own affinity for trails in general definitely evolved immensely over the course of my thru-hike 2011 drink. Like, I was always respectful of the outdoors. I knew that obviously putting trash outside was wrong, but my connection with nature was just so different after spending months on end on the Appalachian Trail. So yeah, I apologize if those are two very different questions, but so I guess the first is there a trick to instilling the ethic? And I guess the second, is there any crossover that you've noticed with long distance backpackers / thru hikers and I guess possessing that ethic?
Right. Great question. I mean, it's really easy to teach people the hard skills, and it's easy for people to pick those up. I think the trick, and there are several of them, but I think one of the really important tricks, so to speak, in terms of the tipping point for that ethic or the development of somebody's own personal outdoor ethic, is just helping people forge a connection to the outdoors, whether that's a city park or open space or a remote wilderness. That connection is where that ethic tends to start, because you start to realize your place and your role in the environment. The other thing that we layer on there is the why. why are we asking you to do these things? Why are we recommending that you don't burn your trash, that you don't bury leftover food, that you properly, hang a bear bag or use a bear canister? So when people start to have a connection to a place, and this is a similar arc to, I would argue, a long distance hiker, once you start to form that connection and then you start to understand not only the consequences of our actions, but the why behind these practices and recommendations and skills, that's where I start to see people develop. So on the AT, until you get through Georgia, all you're thinking about is probably, can I make it? I've got everything's too heavy. It's cold and wet. It's March. What am I doing here? And then as you start to get into the Smokies, like, okay, I can do this. And then you start to really see your surroundings, and you make it to Damascus, and you start to change over time as you settle into it. But then all of a sudden the reality hits that I got to take care of this place. Right. And I think for some long distance hikers, particularly early on in a long hike, there can be a sort of this transient mindset of, it's raining. I'm at the Russell Field shelter in the Smokies. I'm not going to go 200 feet from this shelter to dig a cat hole in the middle of the night in the rain. It's just not going to happen. And you know what? I'm not even going to be here tomorrow. I'm going north. And so I think that once people break through that piece of a long distance hike, they start to settle into, wow, I've got an opportunity here to either give back or to help take care of this place, or to even just share information with others. So I do see that crossover. And I think what I have seen in my career with Leave No Trace in the last 20 years is when people spend that much time outdoors, it's hard not to form a deep connection with places like the AT or the PCT or the CDT. I mean, you name the trail, right? And I think that's just part of that sort of arc of a hike, but it's also the arc of coming into your own personal, and in many cases, really deep connection to the outdoors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always been very impressed with anytime I've been anywhere with long distance backpackers in the backcountry, their persistence in picking up other people's trash. Like, it's never even a consideration. It's never like, okay, will you grab this, or should I pick this up? Like, people are kind of rushing to do it, and it's just like an obligation that they feel. So you mentioned you work with the ATC, and you've been at Leave No Trace for 20 years and a few months. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between what the AT looked like in presumably the late 90s or mid 90s versus what it looks like today from a Leave No Trace standpoint?
Yeah, excellent question. I mentioned it early on, we're always making more people. We're not making more land. We're trying to enjoy a finite resource. And when you look at a trail like the AT that's just so heavily used, but also so loved by millions of people, and affords tremendous outdoor opportunities for people, connection to the land, solitude, physical challenge, all these wonderful things, there has been a significant increase in the impact on the AT. And one of the challenges that we have is we can't always build our way out of problems, right? We can't put a moldering privy at every single shelter. We can't put a bare cable system at every shelter. We can't create more infrastructure for a whole host of reasons. And so it's incumbent upon individuals, but also entities like the trail clubs and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and they all know this, and they are willing partners, and they're very active in their promotion of Leave No Trace. But we've seen a lot of impacts in terms of trail widening and trash and fire pits and shelters and all the things you tend to see when you're out there. And when I say we can't build our way out of things, that's where the education side comes into play. And that's why it's so critical that we individually take the responsibility to do what we can to ensure the sustainability. But just in my time, I've certainly seen an accumulation of impacts. I mean, particularly, when I work for the ATC, the southern end of the trail in March and April gets hammered. I mean, I can distinctly remember some of the early shelters along the trail within the first, say, 30 miles. I mean, before you even get to Neal's Gap, finding things like aluminum lawn chairs and, giant pieces of equipment that it's almost unfathomable someone would start a hike with these things. But people just don't know what they don't know. And so you'd see a lot of impacts on that southern end, and they would start to sort of minimize as you head north in some cases. But the volume of use is such that that's not always the case anymore. And so, this is one of the reasons that the Appalachian Trail Conservancy has really taken such an active role with Leave No Trace. In fact, the ATC is one of 11 approved providers of that 5-day Leave No Trace Master Educator course. That's how firmly their belief is in Leave No Trace and its utility for the AT, and that it can actually be a real solution. And so, we've seen more impacts, but in some ways, due to the efforts of the ATC, the Forest Service, the National Park Service, and others, it could be a lot worse, I think, if people hadn't really decided to put their shoulder to the wheel and be part of the solution.
And how does a Leave No Trace principle come to be? Like, what's the actual development for how it plays out and how it's written and everything?
So if you look at the history of the principles and how they were developed, they've been through a number of iterations. There were 6, and then there were 8, and then we landed on this current 7. And essentially, as the principles sort of came to life in the early 90s, it was really based on a couple of things. One, what are the impacts that we're seeing on the landscape? And what is the information that people need to know to minimize those impacts? And so we had a lot of smart people that were involved in the 90s in terms of the early development of this. And in 1999 is when we landed on the 7 principles that most people know of today, which have been adapted for different ecosystems and environments and activities and so forth. But the standard 7 principles were really this logical flow of how a recreational experience might play out and what's important. So the planning aspects, right? First principle, and then the traveling and camping and the disposing of waste and leaving what you find, and campfire impacts, wildlife, and other visitors. And in terms of how those principles come to life, it's based in both research. So our principles are science-based, and typically we rely on a field of scientific inquiry known as recreation ecology, which is the study of recreation-related impacts, how they're caused, how they can be mitigated or minimized, and also looked at the managerial implications of those impacts. Things like, okay, if we've got to relocate a bear, what's the cost to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park? We've got to dart a bear and get this bear out, take it 80 miles away to the Cherokee National Forest. And so we pull in the best science that's available, but we also pull in the best current knowledge from practitioners, like what's really happening in the field. And so we have a peer review body that looks at the principles, looks at either new or emerging science. That's how we make revisions over time. And we work very closely with federal and state land managers. National Park Service, the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, to vet the practices to make sure that they are right and they are appropriate. The 7 principles aren't carved in stone. They're living, breathing, so to speak. They are updated periodically based on new science, new findings, new best practices. And so it's an iterative process over time of really honing these to what's most important and what's most effective. And there have been new things. For example, the newest issue for us in the last couple of years is the intersection of the outdoors and social media. And so we released some social media guidance just to get people to think about the role that it plays in the outdoors. And that's just a really contemporary example of how we look at the Leave No Trace principles through a lens of social media. Or another one that was recent was the use of drones in the outdoors. That's another thing that we took a hard look at. So there are these issues that we periodically look at the principles and determine, are they applicable? Are we giving the right information? Do they need to be updated? So it's a process for sure.
Yeah, the drone issue is really interesting. My buddy Jabba, who listeners of the show are very familiar with, we were given a drone prior to our PCT hike. We were going to be making a documentary, and in the process of preparing for the hike, as we took it out to our local park, we were aware of just how noisy it was, and it dawned on us, although we had this amazing technology, playing with a DJI is an incredible toy, but like we just felt wrong and dirty about bringing that to a pristine area. And like, obviously there would have been logistical issues where there were a lot of stretches of the trail where it wouldn't even be allowed. But yeah, the drone thing is like, it's always cool to see that footage, but knowing that you're seeing drone footage just brings me back to the time of this thing that sounds like 1,000 bees over your head, and like how that must disrupt wildlife, not to mention other people's experiences. It's just, yeah, I don't think there's a place for it. You mentioned that Leave No Trace once upon a time was 8 principles. I'm curious, what was the 8th one that got cut? What was the Pluto of the group?
Well, it was more about the principles, sort of how they took shape. For example, there was plan ahead, there was travel on durable surfaces, there was camp on durable surfaces, there was pack it in, pack it out, then there was properly dispose of what you can't pack out. So it was almost just sort of a rearranging of what was on paper. So we didn't really have one that got lopped off. It was actually a combination of some existing principles and the addition of 2 new, which at the time new and back in 1999 were respect wildlife and be considerate of other visitors. So it was really more of a kind of a reshuffling of the deck with some additional information, because pretty quickly realized land management community said, hold on, you got to have something here about wildlife, right? We're the visitor, this is their home, we need that. And then the other issue was, look, there are lots of other people out here, and the way we choose to recreate can impact other people if we're not careful. And we all need to just share this resource. So it was really more of a sort of, let's get the right wording in here and let's rearrange things to where we're actually comprehensively covering what people need to know in terms of responsible recreation.
Are there any examples of principles being removed because the science has revealed that either they're not necessary or they're not being adhered to or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly not principles, but certainly specific techniques have been removed. Back when I started with Leave No Trace, there was a technique for disposing of human waste in remote locations where you'd actually smear your human waste on a rock and leave it on the surface. And the thinking was that, yeah, right.
Smear it with what?
The thinking was, well, yeah. So I can tell you verbatim how it used to read. You poop on the surface, ostensibly a rock, and you take another rock or a stick and this is exactly how it read. You smear the waste to a thin veneer. And the idea was that UV radiation, oxygen would kill the pathogens. And what we pretty quickly realized is that through some research that was done by folks from Ferris State University and folks from the National Park Service and USDA Forest Service, that the pathogens in human waste can remain viable for up to, depending on the environment, up to like 16 weeks, 4.5 months. That human waste could still be a vector for the spread of disease. It could still pollute water sources. Animals, insects, and other things can come into contact with that waste and so forth. The other thing we realized is that nobody's going to poop, turn around and spread it like you're icing a cake. People don't do that. And so that principle, based on research and the practical implications of that practice was removed from our literature. Another similar practice, we're talking about poop. And if we talk long enough tonight, you'll realize it's one of my favorite topics because it's fascinating. No. We all do it. Touchy subject.
You're on the right podcast in that case.
Zach loves it.
The other technique that was abandoned was for sea kayaking applications, where you'd poop on a rock and then throw the rock into the intertidal zone, thinking there's enough biological activity in the ocean and that with the waves crashing in and so forth to adequately decompose that waste. Well, there's no science to back that up. We're just throwing poop in the ocean. And it had a sort of a catchy name that we kind of all miss. It was called the shitput, but it's a practice that we no longer recommend. And then there are practices that get updated. So for example, we used to tell people to hang their food in bear country, 10 feet up and 4 feet out from the tree trunk or the nearest branch. Well, now it's 6 feet and 12 feet, 12 feet off the ground, 6 feet from the tree trunk or branch, because we realized we're having some failures at 10 feet. And now we're even starting to move more towards the recommendation of bear canisters rather than hanging food because of all the failures we're seeing. So again, it's this iterative process over time of revising the guidance that we provide.
You ever get people that are like frustrated? I mean, I'm thinking about things going on right now with like the pandemic and like masks and no masks and just people getting pissed about, like you said one thing and now you're saying another. Do you ever get people that are like that about when the principles change and they're like not happy that they have to do something differently or anything?
Not usually, no. I mean, in my time, I can't think of any negative feedback I've received when we've updated the guidance. I mean, obviously, if something were tremendously onerous, we might get pushback. So, for example, if Leave No Trace were to come out and say, we don't advocate the PCT bear bag hang anymore, like always use a canister, like that for long distance hikers, that's a real logistical issue. What we do advocate is do a really good PCT hang, right? Same with campfires. We're not anti-fire. If we were, it'd be problematic. We're pro-responsible fire. You can have a great campfire in the outdoors and leave almost no impact. So it's a fair question, but generally, I think people, at least based on my professional experience on the research that we do and having a bead on people's attitudes about their role in stewardship of public lands, most people want to do the right thing. Most people don't wake up like, how can I hurt the earth today? Like this is, the impacts that we see, the majority of them are not malicious intent. It's just, it often boils down to just ignorance. People just don't know. And so it's a huge opportunity that we have in front of us to teach these people how to enjoy these places in a way that leaves as little impact as possible.
I would pay good money to see like a montage of all the failed shit puts that have ever happened. I got to imagine so many attempts where people are trying to hurl their feces into the ocean have gone awry where it ends up on them or something like that. So yeah, if anyone has that footage, Backpacker Radio will pay good money for it on Chauncey's dime. Okay, so you mentioned that we have a good opportunity to remove people's potential ignorance on the subject of LNT. So I'd like to jump into the particulars of the 7 principles. So if it's cool with you, I'd like to just jump in principle by principle, not only what they
Sure.
are, but I think really hammer home why they're important as well.
Sure.
So for the first one, I'll just introduce them and then kind of let you do your thing, and then we'll probably have some follow-ups. But the first principle being plan ahead and prepare.
Critical. I mean, planning is imperative. Every long distance hiker knows that planning is imperative. You may not know it on your first long distance hike, but you learn pretty quickly how important it actually is. And when you started out the show and asked, sort of your biggest Leave No Trace pet peeve, that's mine, is just people who are unprepared. And I'm not saying you got to go out and buy a bunch of fancy gear. You need to take a wilderness EMT course or swiftwater rescue. Just do some basic homework on the internet, right? Find out what the trail conditions might be like. Find out what equipment's required or necessary. Find out if there's restroom facilities or if there's, if you need shelter reservations. Just those really basic things, because what we deal with in terms of impact, when we look at the types of things people do in the outdoors that cause impact, we look at things like illegal actions. It's kind of hard to educate people out of illegal actions. If they're hell bent on doing something illegal, they'll probably do it. We also have unavoidable impacts. So where you put your tent for the night, it potentially could leave a footprint there. But generally speaking, if you pick a durable surface, it's going to recover. But then we also have things that lead to impacts from people being unskilled, people being uninformed, and people just simply being careless. And that's where we live at Leave No Trace. We try to educate people who are uninformed or underinformed, unskilled, and just may engage in careless actions, like not securing your trash. It's a windy day. You're on McAfee Knob and big gust blows your lunch trash off the rock there. And so when we think about the planning aspect, it's the best way to ensure that we can minimize our impacts. Because really what we're trying to do is we want to eliminate the avoidable impacts, and we want to minimize the unavoidable impacts. And planning is the best way to ensure that. I mean, it's critical. And COVID's made that even more apparent, just how important it is to know what you're getting into, because so many facilities over the last year, there's no toilet paper, there's no bathroom facilities, there's no trash pickups, all these various things. So planning is absolutely essential in terms of a good outing in the outdoors, regardless of how you choose to do so. So you just can't stress that one enough. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I mean, it couldn't be a more true adage. And I encourage people to really take that to heart and think about, what decisions can I make before I ever leave my house? They're going to help me not only have a more fun trip, a safer trip, a drier trip, a lighter trip, but also minimize my impact.
This might be an unfair onus to put on you, but let's say somebody listening to this has no experience backpacking, maybe some day hikes under their belt, lives, let's just say, out in the AT area, and they want to do a short section hike. What would you recommend to them in terms of proper forms of preparation? Because oftentimes they don't know where to start. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not in that standpoint, but let's, for the sake of argument, say that you are. What would you recommend to somebody who wants to prepare adequately for a short backpacking trip on a well-traveled, well-marked trail like that?
I mean, if you're going to, hit the AT, obviously you're going to want to look at the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's website. They've got tremendous resources. Then you've also got forums like White Blaze and others where you can get a lot of good information, and even retailers like backcountry.com. I mean, there are entities like that provide great information. YouTube's a great source. There's something to be said for the school of hard knocks. The problem with that is the environment often takes some of the hardest knocks from people who are learning on the fly. I mean, I'll just be perfectly honest with you. My first backpacking trip on the AT, not ever, but as a freshman in college, because when I went to undergrad, I was within an hour of the AT. The best piece of gear I had was a pair of North Face gaiters. This was a March backpacking trip. I was in blue jeans and the old white cotton thermal long underwear, and I was going to hike from Cades Cove in the Smokies to the Nantahala Outdoor Center, and it was in March. I mean, I was woefully under-equipped. As someone who considered myself a reasonably, accomplished outdoors person, I had an external frame backpack too, a Camp Trails external frame. So, there's so many good resources out there to learn so that we can minimize our impacts. And on a trip like that, when you're cold and wet, what do? You build a fire at every shelter you stay at. So there's impacts associated with that. So again, the internet is a tremendous resource. If it's not the AT, if it's the Benton MacKay Trail or any other trail that you're interested in, Mountains to Sea Trail, for example, it's just a great idea to go to the source and find out what they recommend, because most entities give you pretty good guidance these days on planning for trips. Additionally, it never hurts to visit our website, lnt.org, to look at specific information about minimizing your impacts and how planning can really help you do that. So I would encourage anybody who's going out for that first trip, definitely do your homework. Don't just blunder into something. Again, you can learn a lot that way, but the environment oftentimes takes a hit in that sort of scenario.
The second one is travel and camp on durable surfaces.
Travel and camp on durable surfaces. I mean, this is, when you're on a long distance trail, or any trail for that matter, that's ostensibly a well-designed trail, you're on a durable surface. And a lot of people say to us, well, isn't a trail an impact? A trail is one of the coolest things we have in terms of providing a great outdoor experience, but in a way that, like the AT is, generally speaking, so there are exceptions, but it's a pretty well-designed trail. It's got a lot of TLC that goes into maintaining that thing. A lot of volunteers spend a lot of time with, tools out there, making sure that it's in the shape that it's in. And so sticking to those durable surfaces, rock, gravel, sand, even snow, dry grasses, and avoiding those really sensitive things, surfaces, moss, broadleafed plants, just really thinking about what's the impact that a footfall is going to have here, and what's the cumulative effect of footfalls over time. It's a matter of just doing what we can to minimize those impacts whenever we're traveling, whether that's on foot, on a bike, on skis, on snowshoes. In terms of the camping aspects, where facilities are provided, we always encourage people to use those facilities. if facilities don't exist or you're interested in a more, backcountry or pristine camping experience, seek out a durable location. Look for somewhere that you can camp and really leave as little trace as possible. We do have some cool gear these days that can enable that. We've got freestanding tents. When I was a scout, you had to drive stakes in the ground. Now you can put your tent up and oftentimes not even put a stake in the ground. We got ultralight inflatable pads. This idea of having to put our tent on the softest ground we can find. I mean, you can camp on a slab of rock in outside of Moab with a new school, sleeping pad and sleep like a baby. So just thinking about where you're going to camp, how you're going to camp. There's, hammocks have become really popular. As long as you're using tree saver straps, I mean, hammock camping is a great minimum impact way to camp. And for a lot of long distance hikers, people are really interested in some of the newer gear that's out there. So just thinking about the traveling aspects, another item of equipment that people, we have access to are gaiters. I mean, a good pair of boots and gaiters will help you stay right in the middle of the trail, whether it's wet or muddy, doesn't matter. And so just thinking about how we can minimize those impacts, because ultimately somebody's going to have to come behind us, usually a volunteer, and fix that damage or that impact, especially when we get trail widening and braiding and cut switchbacks and all those things. And so just giving some thought to what you can do to make sure that you're staying on those durable surfaces goes a long way towards protecting the resource.
So here's one that I'm sure you get frequently. The trail is very muddy. Should someone walk through the muddy trail or go around it? Because you talk about surface durability. Some people might associate mud with not being a very durable surface. What's your stance on that?
I mean, the research would show, and we advocate, just trudge through the mud. Because anytime we start to widen the trail, you just cause more issues. And that oftentimes happens where a trail is in an area where it can continue to be widened. And so, we can have all sorts of trailside impacts. And it also, there can be some sort of copycat. You see the person in front of you walk around it. Well, what are you going to? You're probably going to walk around it. Well, if that happens with a million AT hikers, then they're going to have to deal with those impacts. And so to the extent that you can just trudge through it and be prepared to do that, it's great. And again, I'm one of the things that we try not to do is say, go out and buy a bunch of gear, right? Because there's issues, there's sustainability issues and cost issues. And, we try to provide alternatives. I saw a woman in the Tetons last year who had a pair of Keen sandals on. And this was in, late June, so there was still some snow on the trails. She had taken 2 plastic grocery bags and put one on each foot and then just tied them around the top of her ankle, and off she went. And I said, hey, do you mind if I take pictures of this? She's like, why? And I told her who I was and why I wanted to take the pictures. And she loved it because she said her boyfriend thought she was nuts, but I thought it was amazing. And it's like a real world example because we advocate that kind of practice all the time. And it may look goofy, but her feet were dry. So, there are alternatives to, forking over a bunch of money for equipment, but being prepared, again, back to plan and prepare, can help you stay to those durable surfaces. And just think about the cumulative impact over time. And the one time somebody walks around a mud puddle, it's not the end of the world. It's when it happens over and over and over is when it becomes an issue, both in terms of volunteer cost and time, financial cost and time and resources, and then also the damage to, the environment.
Chance gets people propositioning to take pictures of her feet all the time as well. I think the last thing, harkening back to a previous podcast, the last thing on this subject is, I think, something that is important, especially in the era of Instagram, is people stepping off trail to get the perfect IG photo and stepping on wildflowers or whatever it might be. I would presume, is that an increasing issue that you guys are seeing at Leave No Trace?
It is. And, again, I mean, it boils down to your personal ethic, right? Will plants grow back? Probably. Even if they're trampled into oblivion, maybe not. Are there alternatives to get that shot? That's what I try to get people to think about. Like, is there a way for you to get the shot you want that's maybe it's not that exact shot, but it's pretty darn close? Is there a way to do that and not leave any trace? That's what I try to encourage people to do. Because, leave no trace, it's not black or white, it's not right or wrong. Leave no trace is not rules or regulations. I mean, the most common answer with leave no trace is usually it depends. And so, we're not the hiking police. I mean, we don't ever want to be that way. And we don't ever want to see leave no trace be used to police people in the outdoors. It's never the intent, ever, in any way, shape, or form. So for me to say, don't step off that trail on your 2,000-mile hike to get that shot that you want, that's a decision that somebody's got to make. What I would encourage them to do, and for me, this is a big win, to stop and think, right? If you stop and think about the potential consequences of the action, then you make your decision. That's all I can ask for in people. Because leave no trace is a spectrum. One end, we've got a ton of impact. The other end, we have very little, maybe even none. And we're not asking for perfection. Leave no trace is not about perfection. It's about action. Just find your place on the spectrum. If you go out and hike and you stick to the trail, you left no trace. If you go out and you hike and you stick to trails and you dig a cat hole for your poop, that's two things you did, right? So it's the cumulative effect of all these good actions. That's also how we win. So to your question about, doing it for the gram, I mean, sure, in a perfect world, people would avoid those impacts if they can. And whether that's stepping off a trail or taking pictures of the poppy super bloom in the last couple of years in California, right? A lot of chatter, a lot of articles, a lot of Instagram posts about people just walking out in these beautiful poppies. I'm sure you probably even heard about the guys that landed a helicopter, right, in the poppies. We're not the arbiter of what's right and wrong. We just want to give people a framework to think through these things and make the best decision they can. So that's a really personal thing that I think people just have to make that decision, because leave no trace is not going to, we don't have people out in the woods that are going to, slap you on the wrist. It boils down to your own personal ethics.
Awesome. And the next one, the third one would be dispose of waste properly.
Big topic, big one. All the things that are wrapped up in this are trash and litter, as well as gray water, like when we wash our dishes or brush our teeth. But then also we've got the human waste side of things. So trash and litter, it's pretty obvious. Pack it in, pack it out. I mean, we don't advocate burning or burying trash. Typically, it's wildlife very attracted to that sort of thing. Trash often takes, a lot more heat than people think to combust. And furthermore, when we burn trash, the amount of toxins that are given off that people are then standing around a campfire breathing is pretty stunning. There's a Forest Service research entity called the Missoula Technology and Development Center, MTDC. They did a study in the mid-2000s on campfire toxins, and they burned a bunch of common items that people would camp with and then burn. And when you look at the results and you see that these items give off things like xylene and lead and toluene and these really harsh, like carcinogens, and people are standing around drinking a beer while they're burning stuff, it's not good for you. It's not good for the environment. And furthermore, trash begets trash. If somebody sees a trash fire ring, probably gonna leave their trash in that fire ring. So pretty easy one there. Pack it in, pack it out. That also goes back to planning. If you minimize the packaging before you leave the house, it's just less trash to pack out. In terms of gray water, and this is any water we use for washing or brushing teeth or what have you, we recommend disposing of that ideally 200 feet from any water source, campsites, trails. We just want to minimize the attraction that wildlife might have to those scents and smells. We also advocate for things like dishwashing. If you're going to, long distance hikers do it a little differently. A lot of folks, use your finger, wipe out your bowl, drink the water, and be on your way. But we also advocate straining out things like food particles and whatnot. Put them in with your trash and then dispose of that wastewater well away from water sources, campsites, trails, etc. On the human waste side, we deal with two different things. We got solids and liquids. And with the liquid waste, urine is not a terribly big problem in the outdoors. Generally speaking, urine is not, it doesn't lead to a significant spread of disease in the outdoors. It certainly can, especially in high concentrations. And so we advocate, again, 200 feet from water sources, campsites, and trails to urinate. And for ladies, if you use toilet paper, we advocate packing that out. Urine is, it can be a problem. Again, if everybody pees behind the same rock or tree, we start to get an accumulation of that. It can be an aesthetic issue. It can be a social issue with the smell and so forth. And in some places like river corridors, it can be a big problem if there's a lot of urine flowing into a water source. In terms of the solid human waste, our primary recommendation would be, well, again, it goes back to the spectrum. One end, we've got flush toilets. Use them, right? If they're there, use them. But then you've got things like privies and outhouses and pit toilets. And in some cases, you've got high tech, solar dehydrating toilets and composting privies and things of that nature. And then you've got a hole in the ground. And then you've got pack out, right? Like a wag bag type situation, clean waste, a biffy bag, a rest stop bag. And again, it's like find your place on that spectrum in terms of dealing with your human waste. But our primary recommendation would be if there's no facilities, there's no privy, dig a hole 6 to 8 inches deep. People always ask how big around, and I usually say it kind of depends on your aim, but preferably about 4 to 6 inches around. Dig the hole, do your business. If you can pack out the TP, that's going to leave the least impact. But we've always advocated that if packing out soiled toilet paper is just not palatable for you, you can bury it deeply in the hole. It will decompose. And so a lot of people, don't know that that's part of the leave interface guidance, that you can bury it deeply in the hole. And so then cover up your hole. I've heard lots of, sort of urban legend about it. And then you stick a stick in there to mark it so people don't dig up that spot. I don't recommend that. Cover it up, disguise it. Basically let that be. The one question we get a lot is, what if I have sort of an emergency and I've got to go and I don't have a hole dug? Well, just go on the surface, dig a hole next to it, take a stick, move the poop in the hole, put that stick in with your poop, cover it all up, you're good to go. Human waste is one of the biggest impacts that we can have on public lands. In human waste, there are over 100 different pathogens, viruses, and bacteria that can cause disease. Hepatitis, salmonella, we can spread things like giardia or cryptosporidium. Poop is something that we all do, and we've got to deal with it. And it's just imperative that we are prepared to deal with that. Carry a trowel. I know a lot of long distance hikers like to use things like, a lightweight tent stake, perhaps, like a sand stake or a snow stake that's light. And those tools can work as long as you can get that 6 to 8 inches, because that's where the decomposition really occurs. And there's 4 really primary objectives to proper disposal of human waste. Number one is we want to minimize the spread of disease. And so putting that in the ground is imperative. We want to minimize the chances of polluting water sources. So that's why we advocate that 200 feet. If you don't know your pace in your head, take about 70 to 100 big steps and you're going to be about 200 feet. So we want to minimize the spread of disease. We want to minimize the chances of water pollution. We want to minimize the aesthetic impacts. I mean, if it's brown and warm in yours, nobody else wants to see that. And lastly, we want to maximize the decomposition. So that's why we say 6 to 8 inches as opposed to like 2 feet, because we want to stay in that soil horizon where those organisms can get in and decompose that waste. And so human waste, it's a touchy subject for a lot of people, but I mean, we just take it head on. It's a bodily function that we got to deal with, and it's something we can deal with.
Go ahead, Chance.
No, that's okay. You first.
Has the guidance on burying your toilet paper changed? Because I feel like that's something that potentially is misunderstood in the backpacking community, because I think some people will rain down on other people for not packing out their TP. And then are there certain environments where carrying out your TP is more recommended than other environments?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the notion of burying your TP deeply in the hole has been in our literature since the late 90s. And while it does leave less impact to pack it out, the thing in terms of like pack it in, pack it out, the question you can ask yourself is, would this item or thing be here if I weren't? And that is totally applicable for biodegradable items apple cores, coffee grounds. Will they decompose? Sure. So will a Chevy Suburban if you give it enough time, right? So the question is, would it be here if I weren't? Packing out your toilet paper does leave the least impact. That said, it's just not always practical, especially with groups of kids. It's not always practical to have a 12-year-old walking around with soiled toilet paper. So we know that if you bury it in the hole, it will decompose. In fact, we have been working with a recreation ecologist who's been studying recreation-related impacts for over 30 years for the U.S. Geologic Survey, who's been running a multi-year experiment looking at decomposition rates of toilet paper that's been buried in the ground. And what was fascinating is when we looked at sort of the methodological aspects of setting up this study, he queried some colleagues that were soil biologists and ecologists, and they said, look, we asked them, should we soil the toilet paper before we bury it for this experiment? Right, literally use toilet paper. And they said, if you do that, it will decompose even faster because it will be more attractive to these decomposing organisms. So we actually ended up burying just regular toilet paper. And the year one results, and this hasn't been published yet, but I can tell you that the year one results indicated the toilet paper was completely gone.
Wow.
He also buried wipes, like people commonly are using these quote unquote flushable wipes. After a year, there were still some fibers remaining from those wipes. So those we would recommend packing out because they don't decompose as quickly. The problem is it can potentially be attracted to wildlife. They dig it up, then we've got poop going all over the place. So the TP issue, as long, the idea is like if you bury it and you bury it deeply in the hole, it's going to decompose, and it's totally acceptable. The problem that we have is when people lift up a rock and poop and put toilet paper and they just put the rock back down on it. That's not adequate. And so I think that some of that sort of insistence on packing out is because people see toilet paper spread around the outdoors, and it's easy to say, okay, if everybody would just pack it out, we wouldn't have this problem. And I argue if everybody would bury it properly, we wouldn't have this problem. So either is acceptable. And
I was actually
when I tell people that, they're oftentimes surprised to hear that, but it's documented. It's been in our literature since 1999.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I know a common complaint that I hear is that it gets dug up if you bury it and like dragged around the campsites. So what you're saying is if your hole is the depth that it should be, it's not going to get dug up. But if you're burying it too shallowly, then it has the potential to get dug up.
Yeah, I think generally that's right. I mean, it's not a guarantee that it's going to get dug up, but it certainly could. But if you bury it at the proper depth, you certainly minimize the chances of it being dug up. And that's really the key.
One more thing before we move on from the poop topic, unless Chauncey's got more poop questions. You mentioned that soiled toilet paper decomposes faster than just regular toilet paper. So then, is it follow that getting as much surface area covered with poo as possible would speed up the decomposition process? Is it advantageous for backpackers to use a folding technique where they're covering as much of the toilet paper as possible in their feces?
I mean, I think intuitively you might make that leap. I guess my concern there would be if you have an issue and you get it on your hands, it's harder to clean your hands well in the backcountry. And so in lieu of that, what we might advocate, which was a totally viable technique, would be to, and this actually does speed up decomposition. And not everybody's willing to do this because a lot of people don't like to play with their poop. Just like they don't like to smear it to a thin veneer, a lot of people don't like to do this. But if you actually add a little soil in with the poop and the toilet paper and take a stick and stir it up, you make poop soup, that will speed up decomposition. That, in my opinion, would be a better way to integrate some soil in there and to help speed up the decomposition than trying to, cover every square inch of 1 square of TP with feces. I think that's a bigger health concern, probably from my perspective. Let me also add, when we talk about proper disposal of waste in the outdoors, one of the things that is important to think about, particularly for long distance hikers and specifically women, is proper disposal of menstrual products. So whether it's a pad, whether it's a tampon, those items need to be packed out. There are we know lots of women use like menstrual cups, long distance hikers, and that's a totally viable option. The question that has come to us, and this is something that our peer review body has dealt with, is what do you do with that blood? It's a biohazard potentially, right? And so we advocate that if a woman chooses to use a menstrual cup, that she simply empties that 200 feet from water sources, campsites, and trails and puts it in a cat hole, just like you would poop.
Fact or myth, can it attract bears?
Okay, based on everything that I know, I have not seen a study yet that indicates a definitive attraction from bears to menstruating women. In fact, if you're interested in it, Yellowstone National Park, nps.gov/YELL, has excellent information on recreating in bear country and specifically addresses the issue of women menstruating in the backcountry. There have been a couple of studies done, and I'd be happy to share those studies with you, but there's no definitive empirical evidence that bears are inherently attracted to menstruating women. So, again, this is based on the science that's out there. So back to the menstrual cup, we advocate burying it in a cat hole, 200 feet from water sources, campsites, and trails. And for washing that menstrual cup, we advocate taking water from a water source to do that. Because, again, blood is potentially a biohazard. We got to be cautious with how we deal with that in the outdoors.
This is the most intelligently we've ever spoken on these subjects. So thank you very much for that. Johns, is there anything else you want to hit on for the dispose of waste properly subject?
No, I asked my big. When should people not bury their poop? Like, I know on Whitney we were supposed to take those bags. I personally didn't poop when I was on Whitney. And then I know like at Katahdin there was another rule about it. So when is where people don't bury their poop?
That's a good question. I mean, the only time we would advocate not burying it, there's two things. One, if there's a provided facility, you got a privy, you got a flush toilet, use it. The other is if there is a specific requirement or regulation from the land manager that human waste has to be packed out. So where we see this most commonly, and I would say one of the communities of recreationists where it's most accepted is the river running community, particularly in the West, where you go on a raft trip, we just take a groover, we take a washable, reusable toilet to pack out that waste. Over the course of my career with Leave No Trace, I've seen where more and more places have instituted pack out systems like Whitney or Mount Rainier, for example, where they want people to actually pack that waste off of those mountains because it's just too many people. The environment can't deal with that waste. It takes a long time to decompose. It's a health hazard. So it really boils down to rules and regs, because I find that when people pack out their human waste in the absence of a rule or regulation, like that's a quantum leap for most people, just to like voluntarily poop in a bag and like then throw it in their backpack. I mean, good on you. Like if you're willing to do that, it's going to leave the least impact. But to your question, it's really following the rules and regs of a place and making sure that it can, we can have sustainable recreation. Whitney, the situation, they tried lots of things, lots and lots of solutions. They finally said, okay, we got to get people to just pack it out themselves. And it seems to be working. The other thing that I'll mention is there's been some pretty interesting research done on human waste, and it sounds like you two are interested in that sort of thing. I'll give you the quick snapshot. There was a researcher I mentioned earlier with Ferris State University that worked on a study looking at the pathogen survival of human waste that's deposited on the surface. And they looked at an arid environment, a temperate environment, and an alpine environment. And the waste actually decomposed quickest in the arid environment. It just dried out, right? Sort of intuitive that it would dry out, and because of the lack of moisture, it kills the pathogens and so forth. What was fascinating in the alpine environment is that the mass of poop, because on a sunny day, it heats that up because it's dark, and it would then bury itself in the snow. And then in the temperate environment, things tend to move at a bit of a different pace just because of the additional moisture and so forth. So there's some pretty interesting work that's helped inform these practices, but that also helps inform policy in terms of pack out. Land managers look at science, they look at the conditions on the ground, and they make these decisions based on what's best for the resource and the people spending time there.
I thought I was done with the poop subject. I'm definitely not. Two questions. I'm going to say them both just so I don't forget. But one is people that are hiking with their dogs. Would they just
Mhm.
simply bury a hole 6 to 8 inches as well? And then
Yep.
secondly, are you aware of any compostable like diaper liners for someone that's hiking with their baby? Or should, in the situation of hiking with a young one, should you always pack out their obviously like a diaper is a ton of material. I can't imagine that that would ever be
Yeah.
fine. But if there's like a diaper liner situation, would that be? Is there anything like that that exists?
Um, to the dog question, if you're on a day hike, pack it out, right? Because dogs, their diet is not derived from the natural environment, unfortunately. I know they're canines, and people ask this question all the time, like, why can animals poop on the ground and I can't? Aren't we animals? Yeah, we are, but bears don't take Viagra and Celebrex and St. John's Wort and aspirin, right? And so what comes out of our bodies is not naturally occurring. Same with dogs. I mean, most dog foods are processed foods, and so if you can pack it out, pack it out. If you can't, then you bury it in a cat hole. That's the best solution for that. Um, to your question about, well, actually, let me just also mention this. I have a colleague who works with the U.S. Geologic Survey. He's a hydrologist, and a couple of years ago, they did a study looking at water sources in backcountry locations in Rocky Mountain National Park, which is a 268,000 acre park in Colorado that's about 98% federally designated wilderness. And they were looking in both moving water and flat water, still water, in the park, and they found all sorts of pharmaceutical contaminants that
Hmm.
have come from people's urine. And some of these locations were way in the backcountry. So they're finding these traces of pharmaceuticals that otherwise would have never been there. So that's just a sort of a fascinating anecdote about this idea of the things that we bring into the woods in our bodies. To your question of the diapers and the babies, that's a little tricky. Um, you could certainly bury baby poop just like you could adult poop. I'm unaware of any compostable diaper liners that could be buried. It's probably I have a child, but he hadn't been in diapers in a long time, 14 years. So I've been out of the diaper world. There may be some newer products out there. I'm unaware of anything that's available that would be buriable, so to speak, and compostable for a long distance hiker. So that's certainly something you'd have to explore. I just don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering that. I wonder if bears who take Viagra are more likely to be attracted to menstruation. And then I do have one more question about the waste question. This is something I see popping up in the Facebook groups all the time, and it always leads to a very heated debate. The people like chucking things like apple cores off into the woods, right? Like I think for most people, that's the intuitive response. This is just going to turn into nothing in no time. So one, what is Leave No Trace's policy on that? And two, I don't know if like you have a hierarchy of things that are the biggest problem in the world, but where does something like an apple core rank versus, people shitting on the surface or cutting switchbacks or whatever it might be?
So the issue of biodegradables, it goes back to what I said earlier. Like if you're hiking through an apple orchard, chuck your apple, right? You're hiking through you're in, on the PCT in California, and there are any apple trees around potentially. The issue with those biodegradable items, yes, they will biodegrade over time. The issue is the potential impact on wildlife and what tends to happen. So there's three responses that wildlife have to human recreation. There's attraction behavior, where wildlife are actively drawn to human beings. They view either humans as a purveyor of a food source. They are interested. They smell good, whatever. Your hip belt on your backpack is covered in salt, and so a marmot finds that very attractive, right? Then you've got avoidance behavior, where wildlife are just generally in some cases, just outright terrified of humans on one end of the avoidance spectrum, but on the other end of the spectrum, they sort of nonchalantly will just move away from humans because either had a bad experience or it's just innate within that species that I'm not really into those two-legged creatures. Then you have what's known as habituation, and this is a term that I think a lot of people sort of understand partially, but don't fully understand. Habituation essentially means that wildlife have lost it's sort of a waning response to a stimulus, right? So they've lost their innate fear of humans. You can go to a lot of parks and protected areas, Rocky Mountain National Park here in Colorado, for example, and you can stand 20 feet from a herd of elk, and they really just don't care that you're around, right? That's generally considered habituation. They're not fearful of humans. They're not that attraction behavior. There's not that avoidance behavior. When we see the tipping point, particularly in species like bears, is when you get a habituated animal that becomes food conditioned. And so there's a lot of literature on this notion of food conditioning. That's when, okay, I'm not scared of you. And now I know you actually have food, whether it's your trash, whether it's your actual food. Rarely are bears predatory towards humans. It certainly does happen, but it's not very common. And so when people chuck biodegradable items off the trail, we start to not only habituate, we start to food condition these animals. And for the mini bears, whether they're skunks or marmots or whatever it may be, it's maybe not that big of a deal, except for the fact that you can start to have an accumulation of animals that otherwise wouldn't congregate in those numbers because they're getting a food source from humans. It's not natural food. By doing so, you can start to spread disease in a population. Animals can lose their drive to forage naturally if they get enough food. You can bring them into harm's way. If they start to get attracted to trash, they start going to trailheads, right? They start going to shelters. They start looking in fire rings. Then you start talking about the megafauna, right? Black bears, for example. It becomes this human safety issue, and ultimately the bear loses. We don't euthanize people because they throw apple cores out in the woods. We euthanize bears because bears go dumpster diving and because bears rip into tents at night. And that's it. It's this how this happens. So for the person that's like, I don't biodegrade, I would encourage you to think about it, right? Because you can be part of the solution, just like you can be the start of a problem too. There's a interesting sort of anecdote about a bear in the Tetons, Grand Teton National Park, a number of years ago, that went from a totally wild bear, a grizzly bear, totally wild, like not seen, not on the bear biologist radar, to a problem bear that's been tagged and relocated and then euthanized in 3 weeks. It happens fast, right? So you're talking about a bear that's wild that all of a sudden gets a bucket of KFC out of the dumpster. It's pretty good, right? I'm going to go do that again. And there's lots of stories like this. I'll give you one more. There was a bear in the Smokies in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, bear number 287. There's been a book written about this bear. Female bear got caught dumpster diving in Cades Cove in the park, and they darted the bear, relocated the bear. The bear went back and started dumpster diving again and actually got picked up by a trash truck, and it got compacted multiple times. Wow. As this truck went around and making its trash pickups, and it got dumped at a landfill. Okay, this is a human we did this, and it's totally avoidable. The bear ultimately lived, but it had to be taken to a veterinary hospital. It had broken molars. It had damaged its spleen. They basically nursed this thing back to life and then re-released this bear. And that's what happens. So it's like, to the people that want to chuck biodegradable items, I'm not going to write you a ticket. I'm just going to say, think about it. Like, you have the power to carry that out. And that's why it's important.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Because I intuitively, I think it's very easy for people to overlook that. But like, just drawing the simple connection between throwing your apple core to legitimately killing a bear, I think if people understand that connection, they're way less likely to do that.
Exactly. And you've seen the bumper stickers, a fed bear is a dead bear, right? And what we find that it takes is just getting somebody to start thinking about it, right? It's not rules, not regulations. It's just like, here's the information, you can make the best decision you can. So to go back a little bit, what's the sort of the biggest infraction? Is it poop on the surface? Is it the apple core hucked out in the woods? There's certainly varying degrees of impact, right? And I think probably one of the most impactful things would be a campfire that gets out of control and becomes a wildfire. We had a horrific fire season in Colorado this past summer, as you all know, and so there's this orders of magnitude in terms of the potential impact, but it all adds up because they're individual impacts, but it's cumulative over time. And so anything we can do to minimize our impacts better than doing nothing, right? Find your place on that spectrum. Not about perfection, it's about action.
Hmm. So speaking of fires, well, I guess we'll get there in a minute. Let's jump to the next principle, which is leave what you find.
Leave what you find is pretty straightforward in some ways. I mean, we really talk about leaving places as good or better than you found them. You know, it's just at a high level, just thinking about how can I spend the night at this campsite, and when I leave tomorrow, nobody knows I've been here. That's really what that one boils down to. There's one other component to leave what you find, and that's the notion of minimizing the spread of invasive species. It's a huge problem worldwide, but certainly in the U.S. And outdoor enthusiasts can play a role in spreading invasive species. And so cleaning equipment between trips, like dumping out your backpack, before you go from one state to the next, on your next trip. This was hammered into my head after doing a trip on the AT in New Hampshire. I had a pair of boots that I'd had for years, got home, happened to be pulling them out of my duffel bag, and I noticed that the sole had started to peel away, and in that sole were a bunch of seeds. I'm like, that's how it happens. I knew that's how it happened, but I'd never actually seen it happen in real life. Well, there's an example of it. So I brought some seeds from New Hampshire back to Colorado. I will say this about the leave what you find principle. It's the most ethical of all the principles. When we talk about ethics, an easy definition is what you do when nobody's watching, right? It's the decisions you make when you're the only person that seems like it's going to affect. And so leave what you find really boils down to your own personal ethic and leaving things. So is that a cool rock? Is that a feather? Is that some other natural object that, if you take it, is the world going to stop spinning on its axis? No. Did you just steal somebody else's wow moment? Maybe. Is that going to end up in a drawer in your desk that what was this rock from? Maybe. So it's one of these really, it's just about thinking, right? About how to leave a place as good or better than you found it. And I'll just leave it at that.
And this one actually makes me want to revise the answer to my initial question for my biggest pet peeve, because something that's highlighted on your website, which is something that I see annoyingly often, we all do, is people carving things into trees. I hate that. I hate that so much. I imagine it's mostly high school kids that have a new boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, and they want to showcase their love by carving their initials into a tree. That really, really, really annoys me, because it just removes you from the natural element of where you are and just reminds you that people leave way too big of an impact. So is there anything to that you want to speak to, or is my general frustration enough?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I empathize with you. It's like, to me, I mentioned earlier, like there's not, with a lot of impacts, it's not malicious intent. But when you see somebody that's carved into a tree, there is intentionality. Somebody like made the decision to like pull out their pocket knife and carve in the tree. And what's fascinating about that one is I understand the emotion that stirs in people in terms of like, why did you do this? I don't care who you dated in 2007. I don't really care, right? The issue that's interesting with this one is there are some legal teeth to this principle, because we have the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, we have the National Historic Preservation Act, we have the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and these acts say if something, in the case of the Historic Resource Preservation Act, if something 50 years old or older is protected. And so the question we get all the time, so it's 49 years, 364 days, it's garbage, or it needs to be packed out. Like, for example, old mining trash, around an old mine. Well, all of a sudden we hit 50 years and one day and it's protected. Like that, really, that's the line in the sand. And so, there have been books published, for example, of tree carvings where people would drive their cattle herds from New Mexico up into the high country of Southwest Colorado, and they would carve on these aspens every year their journey. It was like this living sort of journal. And there's books that have this published, like art. It's unbelievable. And so it's this question of, when does impact become something that's artistic or something to be saved? And it's a tough thing. Who knows? It's like, in 100 years, will those carvings be something that's still people see and they go, wow, look what happened in 2021?
Yeah.
It's hard to say. It is currently, it certainly does seem like something that's avoidable. Let's put it that way.
And here's another one. This one creates a lot of arguments in the outdoor community from what I've seen, is people building cairns. What's Leave No Trace's stance on that?
So in parks like Baxter State Park, Arcadia, or other parks in the Northeast, like cairns are just part of the management scheme, right? They're waymarking. Weather's bad, they help people get from A to Z. They help people stay on durable surfaces. So there's a place for cairns. When we see issues is when we have people either destroy cairns that should be there or build other cairns that maybe the land managers don't want there. And the big one we see now is just the rock stacking in general, whether it's in a riverbed or whether it's at a campsite or, I mean, you name it, a scree field. And the question I just sort of ask, is it art or is it impact? And there's certainly an aesthetic issue associated with it. But more recently, recreation ecologists have started to look at, is there an ecological impact here? And when you start removing stones, you start to disrupt microhabitats. You start to potentially loosen soil that could become, erosion issue. You're trampling around in other areas, grabbing rocks and collecting rocks, sometimes in sensitive environments like alpine environments where the growing season's short, plants are very sensitive. So, the cairns issue, we do have guidance on cairns, and we have a whole set of information for cairns. And, we encourage people to leave existing cairns as they should, that are supposed to be there. We encourage you to leave them there. In terms of building cairns yourself, find out if it's allowed. Some places it is. Some places the whole rock stacking thing is like, yep, there's the rock stacking area. Have at it. So it's just a matter of like thinking about what you're doing. Is it allowed? If you build a cairn, is it gonna, and some bad weather rolls in and somebody's on Franconia Ridge, are they gonna get lost because of the cairn you built 2 days ago when it was blue sunshiny day? So you got to think about the concentric rings of the effects of the actions that we take when we're on the landscape.
And speaking about impacts, the next one is minimizing campfire impacts.
Campfires. We are not anti-fire. Leave No Trace is pro responsible fire. I personally love a good campfire. There's a couple things you got to keep in mind though. One, is it safe? That's the biggest one. Is it safe? Is it legal? Or is there a fire ban? Are you allowed to have fires? For example, on the AT in Georgia, no campfires, right? Is it safe? Is it legal? Is it responsible? Even if you can have one and like, yeah, it seems pretty safe. Well, it's a little dry or it's a little windy. Is it the responsible thing to do? Do you have the skills to build a reasonable campfire? That's another piece. Do you have a way to put it out? A lot of people don't think about that. It's like, it's really easy to climb up something. It's really harder to climb down something. It's like pretty easy to build a fire, but we don't have any water. We don't have any dirt. I don't even have any way to put this thing out. The other one is, do we have a decent supply of wood? A lot of areas, particularly around campsites or AT shelters, for example, they get quote unquote mined of all the dead and down wood. So you can see this sort of human browse line around campsites where people have gone out and they've just basically picked up everything that's fallen on the ground, or they've broken off all the branches they can get to. And so making sure you have an adequate supply of wood. And then of course we advocate, burning wood that's smaller than your wrist, that's dead, that's down, that's on the ground, that can be broken by hand. That way you can have a reasonable fire, provide some warmth and some ambiance, but you're not having a bonfire. We've all seen the campfire rings where people drag logs in, and you got this burnt end of a 12-foot log that just people keep feeding it in over whatever, a season, or depends on how many pyromaniacs are staying at the site. It may be just a day or a night, but the point is, there's a way to have a fire and enjoy it. So if there's an existing fire ring, use it. If there's even whether it's a rock ring that's been built or it's actually a designated metal fire ring, use it. You could also use a mound fire technique where you get mineral soil from, say, a fallen tree where the root ball comes up. You can get that soil and build a pedestal, 2 feet in diameter, maybe 8 to 10 inches tall. Ideally, it's on a fire blanket or maybe like a burlap sack. You can build a fire on top of that mound, and then when it burns out, you make sure the fire's out cold, put the soil back where you got it, and there's no impact underneath. You can also use fire pans. I mean, not ideal for the backpacking crowd, but for lots of recreational users, a fire pan that's elevated off the ground, burn the fire in the pan, there's no impact underneath. Because when you burn a fire right on the ground, you can scorch the first 10 centimeters of soil in one fire. So you kill all these organisms in the soil, which again, it's an avoidable impact. So, but there are alternatives. I mean, historically, we use fire for light, cooking, and warmth. Well, there's alternatives to those things. We got stoves, we got headlamps, we got down jackets. So, just thinking about, do you need a fire? It seems to me there's kind of two camps. People either love them or they don't love them. I don't like the smell. I don't like smelling like smoke. I don't want to futz with a fire. Then there's the people who can't even imagine it getting dark without a fire burning. And so just finding that common ground and really thinking about how you can minimize your fire impacts is critical, and making sure fires are out cold to the touch before you leave a fire. It's one of the most significant impacts we can have on the landscape, particularly when they get out of control.
I have a question about one of the things that you mentioned, which is you said no campfires on the AT in Georgia, which for me, when I was hiking the AT, that was 2019. There was a fire in the fire pit of every shelter by the time I got there. And this is actually the first time that I've heard that. Since when?
It's possible that has changed. When I worked for ATC, there was an issue. There were so many fires that it was becoming problematic. So the Forest Service basically said, all right, we're going to have a moratorium for a period of time. So I can verify that. That may not be the case these days, but my understanding is it's still in place, but I would have to verify that. And it may look like it's seasonal. Okay, yeah, here it is. Building, maintaining, attending, or using a fire at a campfire outside of a developed recreation area is prohibited. So it's quite likely that if you have a fire ring at a shelter, use it. In between shelters where people are just camping along the AT, no fires.
Okay, cool. I think that's good to know because especially when this is going out, there's a good chance that a number of the people listening will be on the AT in Georgia. So, yeah, definitely good to know.
Check the rules and regs for sure. Obviously, things change, but I know historically there were some prohibitions against fire just because of the, when AT ridge runners are out there, and I was a ridge runner in the Smokies in the mid '90s, and we would do counts of campfire rings that we would encounter, and so it got to a point in Georgia where it was very problematic. But again, I would encourage people to verify that information with either the National Forest in Georgia or the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, just to make sure that it's either allowed or not allowed.
Cool.
In light of the horrendous wildfire issues that have happened in the last handful of years in the West in general, obviously a very big deal here in Colorado, but I think probably California was the worst of it, at least the last couple of years. Do you think the Leave No Trace will ever change its stance on how it issues its campfire guidance? I guess the question is, would it ever get to a point where it actively discourages it altogether?
Look, I'm not going to say anything's out of the realm of possibilities. If a land management agency is going to allow fires, then we're going to provide guidance on how to do that safely and responsibly. If a land management agency has a prohibition against fires, then we're going to advocate for that position where that is in place. I can't really see us getting to a point where we just say, Leave No Trace is anti-fire. I just don't. I think that there are ways to do it. I don't think there are ways to do it responsibly and to where you can enjoy a campfire in the outdoors and not start a wildfire. So again, I never say never. I mean, things change, but I think that we're going to continue to promote responsible use of fire, as well as those alternatives to fires, and people can make their own decision based on those factors. I mean, the one interesting thing to note is that when you do look at fires started by humans, and there are a lot of them, when you look at the numbers, and I'm just pulling up some numbers here. This is, and I don't have, this is some of the more current data, but when you look across the 5 largest federal land management agencies, Park Service, Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Army Corps, about 80% of wildfires are caused by humans. And this is all sources lumped together: accidental, negligence, arson. I mean, people burn stuff in a lot of ways. But when you look across the bureaus in terms of fire suppression, you're in the billions of dollars. And the Forest Service bears the brunt of that in terms of fire suppression. And so, again, we certainly monitor these things. And I think if there were a move to prohibit fires, we'd certainly be on board with that because of our longstanding relationships with the federal and state land management agencies. But for now, it's just have a responsible fire. Do it the right way. Enjoy it. Leave the fire pit as clean or better than you found it. Make sure it's out before you leave. Enjoy a fire.
What about explosive gender reveal parties?
That was pretty fascinating. I would say we would not recommend that one.
Okay,
Nor do we recommend burning toilet paper. Honestly, that we didn't touch on that. We talked about burying, but I have a kind of an ongoing list of wildfires that were caused from burning toilet paper. And I've got just right here 10 different wildfires that were caused from people burning toilet paper, like directly linked to people burning toilet paper in the outdoors. And at extensive cost. And in some cases, I mean, here's one. In April of 2011, a guy from Texas was ordered to pay $2.7 million in restitution for burning used toilet paper, sparked a wildfire that burned 83 square miles.
Wow.
So we're talking about real impacts here from that. So there you go.
Seems easier to bury it. And then number 6 here, I think this is probably growing in importance, always important, but I assume growing in importance, is to respect wildlife.
Yep, it is growing in importance as more and more of us flock to the outdoors. Wildlife, their habitat is shrinking in many ways because of just development, and people need places to live. And when more of us move into that urban wildland interface and people recreate outdoors, we can certainly have long-lasting impacts on wildlife. And the big keys are, being mindful to not feed, follow, or approach wildlife. If you're watching wildlife or you're near wildlife and their behavior changes, you're probably too close. It's probably time to back away. This is where things like binoculars or a telephoto lens can really come in handy. And, we've seen a rise in a couple of years ago in Colorado, we had a big issue in the summer of selfies with wildlife, specifically selfies with bears. And then we saw 2 summers ago the same kind of phenomenon in Yellowstone: selfies with bison, selfies with grizzly bears. These are just not really good calls, just not really the smartest thing to do. Because, again, I said it earlier, when there's an issue with an animal, generally speaking, the animal loses in the end, not us. And, wildlife have to be relocated. They oftentimes could end up being euthanized if they become too much of a problem. And a lot of this is just avoidable. We can just avoid impacts to wildlife. So giving them a wide berth, really being mindful of wildlife during sensitive times of the year, mating season, for example, birthing season, spring, fall, just thinking about our role in how we can recreate responsibly in their habitat, in their homes. A lot of people think about the megafauna, the big animals, but we can have just as many impacts on, the mini bears, right? The chipmunks and squirrels and smaller wildlife. And so just giving some thought to how our presence can affect wildlife, but also being very mindful of our trash, of our food and storing it properly, being mindful of making sure that we're putting all of the smellable items away, safely stored, especially in bear country. A lot of people don't think about chapstick or bug spray or other things that have a scent. But just being really mindful and being very meticulous about keeping clean camps, really one of the best things we can do to benefit wildlife in the outdoors.
And eating trail mix off the ground is actually good for your gut flora. So if you spill some food on the ground, you can trash it. But I think the smarter way to do it is just to trash it inside of you. Right, Chance?
Any unwanted M&Ms can be sent my way, please. I really want chocolate at this point.
And then I hate to, I don't want to move too quickly through any of these, but we are way over what I asked already, or what I told you already. So we're just going to move to the last one here, which we touched on a little bit at the intro of the show, but to be considerate of other visitors.
The golden rule of leave no trace. Again, I've said it several times. There are more and more of us trying to enjoy a finite space, and doing what we can to ensure that the way we choose to spend time in the outdoors doesn't unnecessarily impact others is a good thing to do, right? It's this notion of just getting along and thinking about how the actions that we engage in might unnecessarily affect someone. You mentioned drones earlier. That's one where there's a social impact, the noise, but there's also biophysical impacts. And we didn't touch on it, but there's really some interesting research that's come out about anthropogenic noise and how it affects wildlife. And so that's really kind of falls back to the respect wildlife principle, but the concept's the same in terms of the things that we do outside and how they may affect other individuals, other people, is really important to think about. The other thing that I think is really important to think about is that at Leave No Trace, we firmly believe that the outdoors are for everyone, every single person, regardless of your experience or your knowledge or your where you come from. We all share the outdoors, and we all have different ideas. We have different expectations about what it means to be outside, and we encourage people to be respectful of everybody else that we encounter. And we encourage people to help make the outdoors an inclusive space and welcoming for everybody. I mean, just a smile can go a long way. And we're really working hard to make sure that people are treating the outdoors as an inclusive space, particularly in today's world. It's just so important. And we want more people to come to the outdoors, because then we have more champions, right? That will put their shoulder to the wheel, that will take care of the outdoors, that will develop that outdoor ethic, that will be inspired to be the next generation of stewards, or just be inspired to just take care of a place. And so really this idea that the outdoors, we're better together in a lot of ways, and really trying to create an inclusive, safe space where people can enjoy the outdoors the way they want, without either feeling like they're being impacted from others, or without themselves impacting someone else's experience.
And so what would you say would be like the proper way to approach people who are in violation of Leave No Trace? Like, let's say you come to a campsite, you see someone doing something they shouldn't be, or any sort of scenario. What's the proper way to approach that?
It's a tricky one. I think that the best way to approach that is to really, I always tell people, sort of pick your battles, right? It's like, if you feel like you're in a good space to be empathetic to someone and to really be helpful, and to find that conversation starter, to help somebody understand, for example, that they really should put that other thing in with their trash and food at a shelter tonight, because it could be pretty attractive to bears in the area. That's really a good angle. It's just that empathy, knowing that we all didn't know it from the beginning, right? We all learned how to minimize our impacts. We're all still learning probably about different ways to minimize our impacts. And so really thinking about Leave No Trace as a a framework for making these good decisions about enjoying the outdoors responsibly, and thinking about how you can share that information in a way that is not finger pointing or finger wagging, certainly not policing in any way, shape, or form. And there's a technique that's been around for a long time that's been used by rangers for the federal agencies. It's called the authority of the resource technique. And essentially it posits this 3-step process of, if you see something occurring that's kind of impactful, like making an objective statement about that, like, hey, I noticed there were some signs in the shelter that said there's been bear activity in the area. Did you happen to see that? So that would be an objective statement. So you see somebody, for example, that's got spilled pasta right at a campsite, and they don't seem to be in any hurry to pick it up, and just making an objective statement about how there have been bear activity in the area, and then talking about the consequences, of that. It's like, last time I was at the shelter, we definitely had some bears around. There was some food that had been left out accidentally, and it really attracted the bears, and it was made for a long night, having to bang pots and pans to keep these bears away from the campsite. And then the 3rd step is giving an alternative. So, it's great if we can all put away all our food and our trash and our smellables, just so that we can make sure that the bears can stay safe, we can stay safe. So it's this idea of an objective statement, a little description of the consequences, like what can happen. And this all needs to be done in a very friendly, empathetic way. And then it's talking about the solutions or the alternatives. And instead of focusing on the rules or the regulations or I know more than you, it's like we're talking shoulder to shoulder, and we're talking about the impact it has on the bear, right? So that's the authority that resource, the bear is the resource, that it has. I mean, authority is, it's thought of as something that can shape our opinions or our thoughts or our behavior. And so there's the authority of the agency, right? Park rangers may have a badge, but then there's the authority of the natural resources themselves, because our opinions and our attitudes and our perceptions can be changed by just wild nature. And so if we can leverage that wild nature that people are experiencing and immersing themselves in to help educate them in a friendly, non-confrontational way, it can go a long way, and it can work, and it doesn't always work. I guess I would recommend to your listeners, though, if you see something happen and it just makes your blood boil, it's probably best to let it go, because it's probably not going to be that friendly, empathetic sort of contact with someone. And unfortunately, there's just times, what I said at the outset, you got to just pick your battles, because we can't. I've been doing this a long time, and we're not going to win all these, but we can make a difference. And it's a matter of just thinking through the situation. Like, is this the best time for me to try to say something? Or you sit around a campfire and you build some rapport with somebody, and then you swing around to this leave no trace thing, right? Once you've kind of opened the door and you're having a conversation. Where I see people tend to, for lack of a better word, fail when they try to make these types of contacts, they just come in hot, right? I know more than you, and I'm so sick of seeing this, or I'm, super knowledgeable about leave no trace. It's just a matter of like, stop, think, really going to make a difference, or is this really not the best opportunity for me to share my leave no trace knowledge? Another way you can go about it is just lead by example, right? So if you see food on the ground in the shelter, just pick it up, right? And be very nice and friendly, and don't make a big show of it, just pick it up. And then all of a sudden they may learn, particularly if you're a long distance hiker. People look at long distance hikers as like these super knowledgeable outdoors people, right? And so you can just subtly lead by example. And that's another great way to do it. You don't have to say a thing. So it's just kind of thinking through these situations and being mindful that we don't want to turn people off to leave no trace, because everybody feels like they're being watched all the time. That's not what it's about. And it's just about trying to share this knowledge in a way that might resonate with someone and help them understand how they could do things a little differently for the benefit of all of our shared public lands.
Would that answer change at all for the way that people engage one another online? Because I think that's the thing that could really scale when someone posts a picture of them doing X, Y, or Z, not by the L&T code. Would the advice still apply as to like how someone should approach that person in terms of improving their backcountry behavior?
Yeah, I mean, I think the tactic there, I've seen this play out on social media where somebody posts a picture that's something that's less than leave no trace, and they just get dogpiled, right? And a better tactic, I think, rather than just like lighting up the comment section, is just send them a direct message and just say, "Hey, I know you're taking heat on this, and it is a great shot, but um, here are a couple thoughts to consider. I'm not gonna jump in on you like all these other folks might be doing, but I'm just gonna share some knowledge, or maybe even just send them a link to Leave No Trace website, right? Just very subtle. I mean, I find oftentimes less is more when we're trying to address these things. And an example of this on the ground would be if you're going to talk to a group of scouts, you pull the scout leader aside. So he saves face in front of his scouts instead of lighting him up about this, that, or the other in front of all of these impressionable youth. Just pull him aside. Hey, and that way he's still the scout leader, right? Same would be said for the online thing. It's kind of pulling him aside in a private message, say, hey, here's a suggestion, right? Rather than just jumping on the pile, because that friction doesn't really get us anywhere. People bristle at that, and then all of a sudden Leave No Trace, Leave No Trace police are after me. And so I think just really taking a subtle take on that is more effective in the long term than just the quick sort of knee-jerk reaction that I think a lot of us feel sometimes when we see things that we're like, really, that's your post? And so again, that's why our guidance for social media is not heavy-handed. It's very light touch. It's like, think about what your images portray. Think about including a Leave No Trace message with every shot. Like, it's always in style, right? Think about including a stewardship message. Think about also encouraging people to get involved, to give back, volunteer, spend your time. You love the Pacific Crest Trail, go grab a shovel, right? And so social media, just like an axe, right? You can do great conservation work with an axe. You can also do a hell of a lot of damage. Same with social media. It's the greatest tool we have to educate people. We got to use it like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that's great advice about how to approach people both online and offline. Because, yeah, anytime you attack someone, their knee-jerk reaction is just to be defensive, and then they're going to associate the Leave No Trace principle with the person who is defending it, who is probably an asshole, and they might feel compelled to keep on with their unsustainable action just to spite that person. So, yeah, I think that's really good advice. And you actually led directly into what is, I think, our last question here about Leave No Trace's social media recommendations. And specifically, I'd like to talk about your guys' stance on geotagging. And do you discourage people from indicating precisely where they are when they're in remote locations?
That is an excellent question. Just to give you the quick background, in 2018, there started to be a lot of chatter online about this idea of an eighth principle for Leave No Trace, right? Specifically about social media. And in my time at Leave No Trace, there have been numerous calls for, well, not numerous, but a handful of calls for additional principles. Back in the early 2000s, when handheld GPS units became more widely available and became much more accurate, there was big concern that geocaching was just going to ruin the outdoors, and we need a principle for geocaching. Well, we were able to address that under the existing framework of principles. Then we had things like personal locator beacons, spot devices. Oh no, this is good. People are just going to carry a spot device. They won't be prepared. They're going to hit the device, and then the rescue is going to create all this impact, and we need a principle. And then drones were one of the more recent ones as well. We need a principle for drones. And then social media came up. And we took a very sort of measured but comprehensive and thorough approach to this and said, all right, this is potentially an issue, but how do we address this under the existing framework? And it really fits under leave what you find and be considerate of other visitors. So we unveiled guidance in 2019. It was very well received. And again, it's a light touch. And one of the things that we make clear is we're not anti-geotagging. I think some people make the initial knee-jerk, like, oh, they got to be anti-geotagging. It's bringing more people here. But what we encourage people to do is to think about, when you geotag a location, include some information for people about that place, because we want people to have the right information, whether that's the history of a place, whether that's the culture of a place, whether that's specific safety considerations for a place, talking about the importance of planning to go to places. It's a good idea to encourage those things. If you do choose to geotag a location, just think about what else you could include that would help ensure that people that want to go see that great place do it in a way that leaves it as good as you found it, or maybe even better. So geotagging, I think there's lots of thoughts on it, but I guess I would just say we're not anti-geotagging. We just want people to think about how they can help others also enjoy these places responsibly. That's what I would say to the question of geotagging, because for a lot of people, that's how they find great places in the outdoors, particularly people who are new to the outdoors. They see something on Instagram and they go, God, I want to go there. I had no idea that's 20 minutes from my house. Let's go. And that's great, right? More people in the outdoors, that's a good thing. But more people in the outdoors putting Leave No Trace into action is an even better thing. And that's one of the ways we can do it. So if we tag locations, just provide some of that additional context for people so they can have a great experience and do it safely and responsibly, and do it with more knowledge.
When I post anything now about COVID on Facebook, and probably also true for Instagram, you get like the automatic information pop-up bubble, like go to the CDC to get more information because you're probably spreading false bad information. I wish there was something like that about Leave No Trace and anything in remote locations or really anywhere outdoors, because I think that would really serve people well. So Zuckerberg, if you're listening to this, I know you are. Maybe consider that for future outdoor posting policies. But Ben, I know we're way over your time here. Thank you so much for your generosity with it. If you have any last minute messages you'd like to pass along, including where people should go to learn more about Leave No Trace.
Yeah, I do. I just want to follow up one thing with the social media. One of the things that I do in my role at Leave No Trace is study human behavior in the outdoors, and specifically looking at behaviors of interest. How do we influence the decisions that people make? Where are the leverage points for helping people make good decisions about minimizing their impacts? Remember, we're not about perfection, we're just about action. And one of the things that we've seen quite a bit, and it's really unfortunate, is online shaming in the name of Leave No Trace, and bullying. And honestly, we've seen people just outright weaponize Leave No Trace online. We firmly are against that. That is not the answer. Shaming is not an effective long-term technique for influencing people's decisions. It might work in the moment. Somebody might pull an Instagram post down because they got just destroyed in the comments, but that doesn't help form this outdoor ethic. And I just want people to understand that shaming is not the answer. We don't change people's minds about their connection to the outdoors by just outright shaming them. And a better tool long term is to help foster that connection to the outdoors, help people understand how the natural world works, encourage them to spend time, and provide them those resources. And so I just want to make sure people understand that that's never a tactic that we advocate, nor is policing, with using Leave No Trace in any kind of policing fashion. Because again, it's all about what we can individually do to minimize our impacts in the outdoors. If you want more information about Leave No Trace, if you're interested in the specific skills or techniques, or if you're interested in any of our research, if that's something that you might find useful, the research behind the 7 principles, visit our website, lnt.org. We have so much good information, so many resources. We just came out with a new set of Leave No Trace basics with a social media toolkit that people can use. It's ready to go on various social platforms in terms of the collateral that's associated with it, tiles and images and that sort of thing. And so those Leave No Trace basics, if you're looking for a way to share Leave No Trace with your friends, your family, your colleagues, people you know that are new to the outdoors. If you got a great big social media following, just come get this stuff. It's free. We'd love for you to just share that. Please just think about how you can be a force for good for the outdoors and continue to adventure and continue to backpack and hike and enjoy those long distance trails and leave no trace of your visit.
Very sage advice. I hope everyone that listens to Backpacker Radio listens to the full length of this interview. I guess at this point they either are or aren't. But Ben, again, thank you so much for your time. I think this is one of the most important episodes we've ever done. I hope people share it far and wide. I hope people go to lnt.org. And yeah, again, thank you very much for your time. Very appreciative.
Thank you both. I appreciate the opportunity.
Bye.